Hello and welcome to the Capital Area Theater Show. I am your host, Jeremy Patterson, and with me today is local actor, director, artistic director, theater founder, occasional teacher, Clark Nicholson. Hello, Clark.
Hey, how's it going, Jeremy?
It's going well. Thanks for joining me.
No problem, man. It's nice to get out of the theater.
Oh yeah, I guess I should say this. The first interview I did was with Tom Weaver, who's an employee and coworker of yours. And it was at your theater, and for this, you're actually at my house. So
There's a lull in the year that's the first lull we've had all year, so I'm really enjoying finding out that there's a world outside of those walls. It's
Okay.
nice.
Well, good. Happy to have you. So, the last two people I've talked to in relation to a specific production.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of talking with you was kind of to start out a founder series, and eventually, I'm sure this will take several different parts of a talk, but to get your background and kind of work our way up to you coming to Harrisburg and being one of the professional theaters in the capital area.
Okay. You say background, you want to go way, way back, or you want to...
As far back as you're willing to go and happy to go. If you can tell me stories from inside your mother, I'll take those. If you have my first memory of the
It was a
mobile-
nice womb. It was very warm. I was always interested in pretending to be other people when I was a little kid. My mom and my dad divorced when I was like 3 years old, and so I was basically with my mom, and we lived in this house that had a nice porch outside, and I used to make puppets out of grocery bags, out of brown paper grocery bags, draw faces on them and stuff like that, and you'd put them over your head, and I would put together shows and have my grandparents or my mom sit out and watch them, and it sort of started there. And then, and I enjoyed that. And then my mom put me in a production of Hansel and Gretel when I was about 8, and I despised that. I thought that it was not fun for me. I was all dressed up like Hansel, and I just didn't feel. I felt sort of out of place.
With the title character, you're out of place?
Yeah, I didn't dig it. I felt it was sort of like my mom. My mom liked to dress me up anyway. She liked to get these awful Madras jackets and stuff, and put me in and give me funny haircuts that she thought were dapper, and I thought were stupid. So this was just sort of her dressing me up some more, and I just didn't like it. So I kind of got away from any kind of theater until I suppose I was in ninth grade.
Now, hold on. Are you... You're not local.
No, I'm from South Carolina.
So this is all in South Carolina?
Yeah.
City?
I was born in Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay.
It's the capital city. It's not a big city, but it's a nice city. But then my family's from a little town called Saluda, and eventually my mom moved back to that small town with my stepdad. So then I was living in a very small, well, actually out in the country, because we were about 10 miles from town. So I was basically in the Pine Woods. We're the only house on the right side of the road for like 5 miles. You know what I mean? We were back in there. But I didn't. I was a very quiet kid, and I didn't fit in real well. Okay. I didn't have a lot in common with a lot of people that I went to school with, and so I was very quiet. I didn't really excel at sports. I played baseball, wasn't good at it. Tried football. I found it to be a very jarring and painful experience that I didn't particularly dig. Okay. But then there were theater classes, and I enjoyed them. My theater teacher, Gloria Caldwell, she was great, man. She was just a lady from that area, but she loved theater, and she did an exercise, I remember in the first class, where she said, all right, we're going to thread a needle, but it was an imaginary needle and an imaginary thread. And she said, everybody get up and thread the needle, and so we got to pretend like we're threading a needle, and it was all too easy. And then Miss Caldwell got up there, and she could see the needle, and she could see the thread, and the details of trying to make that work the way it, as difficult as it is to thread a needle. And I believed it, I really believed it. And I thought it was amazing, that she could do this just through her own belief. And so I'd say that's where it started for me, was, just that belief right there.
Okay, so you're this kid who's out in the middle of nowhere because you're saying you're on your front porch and you're playing with your puppets and everything, and when you go into a situation where you have Hansel and Gretel, which I'm assuming is it's much of a children's production, but a production. You have this title character, and you're like, maybe.
Yeah.
And then you have a teacher who has nothing, and you're drawn in.
Yeah.
Now, knowing you're very well read. Do you think that comes from that part of it, the imagination part of being out, where you said in the sticks and?
Yeah, well, what it comes from is my father, my biological father, was very well read. He's a very odd guy. If anybody came to Gamut and saw the productions over the past few years, he was our scenic artist for a long time. He moved up here eventually, but he was a very well read guy. And when he divorced my mom, he went over to Athens, Georgia, which is if you've never been down there, it's like a little Greenwich Village of the South. I mean, it's all artists, and it's where a lot of music came out. B-52s came from there, REM came from there. There's a huge music scene. It's kind of where the underground rock scene grew out of. It was eventually Seattle and that kind of stuff. So I had my father living over in Athens, and I had my mother living in Saluda in the Pine Woods. And so going back and forth between this very, very rural, everybody I knew was a deer hunter. That's what they did. I mean, it was like, diversity was whether or not you were going to hunt deer or hunt turkey. It was about it.
Did you end up hunting?
I went hunting, but I didn't like to kill things. So if I saw a deer, I'd go, shh, get out of here. But yeah, I know how to hunt. And, but then I would go split my time there and back over to Athens, and Athens was, all these artists and stuff, and my dad reading philosophy that, he was it was weird. He was a billboard painter. He was a sign painter, but he loved he loved Soren Kierkegaard and Descartes and those guys, and I figured, well, I should figure out who these guys are, and so that's kind of where that reading end came through. I was not the best student, not in high school or in college, mainly because I was reading the books that were not assigned. Yeah. The teacher's like, "Have you read this book?" No, because I'm reading, Man's Will to Meaning, which is more important than your red badge of courage. But anyway.
So were you offering recommendations in opposition?
Yeah, sometimes.
I had a student in a class of mine in high school. We were assigned for the semester to do a project based on Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
It was my friend Liz, and she shows up after we watched the movie in class. Take two class periods and watch it. And of course, being a film nerd, I'm sitting there just like, yes, this is my semester. And she goes, I really love A Farewell to Arms. Yeah. Is it possible I could do something based on A Farewell to Arms? And they were like, man, that passion. Totally. And I was like, what is going on? She had to choose her own thing? So I was hoping that maybe you could be like, hey, Red Badge of Courage, interesting. But how about this? Did you ever get a chance to slide that in? And
Yeah. I love really weird books. Like, there's a book by Alain Robbe-Grillet, who's a French novelist. It's called In the Labyrinth. And it's a bizarre book in which, for the first 20 pages of the book, there's a description of a room. He just keeps describing the room. And to the point where, by the end of it, you understand what room you're in, And then he starts describing pictures on the wall in the room. And then he says there's a picture on the wall and there's 3 people sitting there, and 2 are in profile, and one's facing you and his face looks washed out and sallow, and he's facing you directly. They're all wearing military uniforms. We don't know what battle they've been in, but they look vaguely Eastern European. And then the gentleman in the center stands up and walks out of the room, and you're like, wait a minute, what do you mean walks out of the room? And then you start moving through this picture world, and it's not a standard narrative. Like it really flips your head, and then in the end you realize that this room and this soldier and this thing, Grillet is built in your head, which is what happens in every book, except for that's his goal.
Yeah.
His goal in the end is to say, I made something in your head. It's in there, and I made it, so I am in your head, which is what happens with every book, except for we did this together and you can never get me out of your head. I'm now part of you. Which I thought was really quite amazing.
Yeah.
And to tie this to theater, I'm fascinated by any form or any medium that says, well, you think you know what the medium is, but let's really examine what we're doing here.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I would say with theater, I love theater as a medium, because I love storytelling. But what's specific about that medium that makes me say, yeah, this is what I do with my life? What does it like? I love books.
Yeah.
But I don't write books.
Okay.
I love music. I bang around a guitar, but I really, in the end, I don't make music. I don't record things. I love paintings. I go to all these things for inspiration.
Okay.
I don't go to plays for inspiration. I'd love to go to plays because I'd like to see them and see what other people are doing. But I find that if I'm doing that, I'm either going to copy, like going, oh, that's great, I want to do something like that, and I'm going to copy, or I'm going to go, oh, I'd never do that, so I do something the opposite, which is just a more subtle way of copying.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I like the medium of theater because I think it is unique. It's not film. I love film. I'm a huge film fanatic.
Yeah.
A long time ago, I said, I'm not going to try to be a film person because I think there's enough for me to find doing this and to find the specifics of what this medium is, which is essentially, let's get a lot of people together in a room and let's believe something that's not necessarily literally true, but can be metaphorically true, and bring forward specific questions. Not answers. I don't think theater is best served by trying to give people answers, but it is best served by posing really good questions. So, and to have those questions be active in a room full of people who are all posing that question at the same time.
Okay. So you have this interest in saying, okay, let's get all these people together and deal with this question.
Yeah.
What was the question you got, or the question you felt was being asked of you with the imaginary needle and thread, to take it back to that point? Because you're saying, this is the medium you've chosen to tackle. Mm-hmm. So you think you have this moment of inspiration, mm-hmm. and you talked a little bit about your schooling in between. What were the steps that start getting you towards other people, and where do you go from that specific moment, where you mm-hmm. say, I can see the needle, I can see the thread? Mm-hmm. Does it make you go, I want to do that, I want to be a part of that?
Well, what it did was, if she sat up in front of the class and she had a needle and she threaded a real, actual needle, that would have been a process, and maybe we would have seen it. But there's something about abstracting it into the imaginary, and her saying, okay, the only way I'm really going to be able to thread this needle is with my belief and with your belief.
Okay.
And so by doing that and looking at the challenges of that process, which really makes you break down that very simple thing of what is it that we're doing when we do this, and why is it worth doing? Because you can extrapolate out of that, okay, well, we need to thread the needle because we're going to make clothes or whatever. You can jump off anywhere.
Yeah.
But the initial moment of belief and shared belief between her and me means that we're doing something communal related to a small and in some ways very pedestrian process. But it raises it to the level of an art in a way, mm-hmm. when you go, I'm making something that is essentially not here. And so that action has value. It has a not a tangible value, like, oh, well, maybe, you pay her a nickel to watch her thread, the imaginary needle, but what she's doing has a communal value because we all saw it and we appreciated it, and she was doing it not only for her own benefit, but for the reflection of everybody else in the room seeing it. So it has value, and when I talk about value, and I'll probably come back to that a lot, I'm not necessarily saying monetary value. I'm saying, oh, does that action have worth?
Yeah.
And I think that it does.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So that being the most elementary form of a theatrical exercise can be extrapolated out to, does it have value for humans to go and sit in a room, watch other humans pretend to be things that they are not for whatever reason, because I think that's essentially what makes us human. We don't think that squirrels pretend to be other squirrels. Dogs are wonderful and they're terrific and they can be our best friend. I don't think dogs pretend to be other dogs. I don't know that any other creature, outside of like a mockingbird or something like that, but pretends to embody, another creature. We do it for some reason, and even if you're like, I don't like theater, but you like TV or you like movies or like whatever, even if you just like reality shows, for some reason, we as a creature have a need to sit and watch other creatures involved in human interaction and in problems and working them out. We need to do that. Now, I'm not sure I know exactly why we need to do that, but it's. I mean, you take a TV away from somebody who's been watching it all their life. So you can't go to TV, you can't go to the movies, you can't listen to radio plays, you can't do anything. You can have books. No, you can't have books. Then they will go almost nuts because they need to have these imaginary other human relationships to look at and reflect on for whatever reason. I find that fascinating. Why are we doing it?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I know the answer. But I do know that when we're in a room doing those pretend things and posing those questions, that it feels very alive and very value filled.
Okay, so the first time you have that experience, you get that feeling, that feeling of value. Mm-hmm. Is that the thing you now? And that to phrase it this way makes it almost sound. And I heard earlier a quote from Moss Hart saying that theater's an illness. Mm. And that he just lived his life with this illness. But is the idea, and the framing I was going to use was like when people say if you do a crazy drug, and then you say you're chasing that first high, is it chasing that understanding? Is it chasing sharing that with other people, that connection?
Yeah, I think it is. I wouldn't couch it in terms of the pejorative or the negative to say it was like an illness or a high. To me, it feels like an authenticity.
Okay.
And to do a good story and do it well, and know that it resonates with people. I mean, outside of accolades or whatever. If people say, "Oh, you did a great job," well, of course that feels good.
Yeah.
But to see someone, maybe some years later after you did a show, and they say, "Oh, I saw that show. It made me think different ways about different things, and I actually took this avenue in my life or whatever." You're like, "Wow, I didn't even know I was doing that."
Yeah.
That's rather amazing. So for me, it's chasing a feeling of value and not wasting time while you're on the earth. You know what I mean? If this is what I've decided I want to do, then in those moments I know I'm doing it.
Okay.
And that feels good.
So you go from that moment. What are some steps you take as far as where you're at performing?
Yeah.
From what was the class you said?
Yeah, I had an intro to theater class in high school, and then there were only shows for the 11th and 12th grade students. They did the 11th grade drama presentation and 12th grade drama presentation. But I went down in the 9th grade and said, I really want to be in this. And so they let me audition, and I got like a 2-line role, and they were like, Clark really wants to do this. So I got to be in, and people liked what I was doing, and suddenly where I had not fit in any peer group or anything like that, suddenly I kind of did, because even though I really couldn't find out who I personally was, in these other characters I could find a certain identity. I also came along a short story by Kurt Vonnegut around that time. It's in the collection Welcome to the Monkey House, and it's called Who Am I This Time? And it was about a local actor who was devoid of personality, had no personality, but, a production of Streetcar Named Desire was coming up, and so for 6 weeks he was Stanley Kowalski, and he had a persona.
Okay.
And it was very interesting to find. I of course was not that bad, but I thought it was a fascinating look at things to go, Well, look, if you don't really know who you are, you're not very happy with who you are. You can fake it for a while because you can crawl into somebody else's skin, and see what that feels like. And that to me was fascinating. And so I went from being basically sort of a misfit, very unhappy kid, to being excited about something.
And this is in the 9th grade?
By the 10th, 11th grade, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the 11th, 12th grade, I was known as sort of an odd guy and a funny guy. I wasn't like everybody else, but they liked me because I'd found a thing that I could do.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, let's go watch that guy. And we did a stage version of the Pink Panther, and that was a lot of fun. I was too young to audition for the lead role of Clouseau. So my best friend Brian Rucker played that part, but I got to coach him in being Clouseau. So that was a lot of fun, And I went off to college. I got into the University of Georgia, and that was just amazing. It was a big department. I was very intimidated by the whole thing. I had some wonderful theater classes and some wonderful film classes. I was taught by a guy named Charlie Eidsvik, who was a cameraman for Sven Nykvist, who was Ingmar Bergman's primary cameraman, who invented that quality in films they call the magic hour, where things have a glow and stuff like that. And Charlie largely did a lot of this filming with that. So I was fascinated by that. I knew I wasn't going to do film, but I was fascinated by going, okay, your job is not just going down to the factory and going, if I load up enough boxes, my boss will be happy and all this, because there's nothing wrong with that, and we absolutely need that.
Yeah.
But for a guy, for his life to be, let me see if I can get this quality of light right to affect people's emotions. It's like, that's a job. That's a job somebody has. That's amazing. And people find it has value.
Yeah.
And which can be quantified by money, but in the end, which is just is a very poor abstract of what the value actually is, but still, it does say, for some reason, for a lot of people, a guy finding the right quality of light to make them feel wistful is valuable to them.
Yeah.
That's rather amazing, especially when you come out of the pine woods.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. So went to University of Georgia for a while, and my stepdad got really sick back home and got collapsed lungs. He worked in the cotton mills, all my family did, and of course got like brown lung, as a lot of my family did. And so I had to go back and work for the family, and I lost my residency in Georgia, and so I couldn't go back there. So I ended up going to, I collected a lot of little colleges. I went to University of South Carolina at Spartanburg, and Spartanburg Methodist, USC Upstate. I went to a lot of different schools. And in all of them, I did really crappy in most of my classes because I wasn't interested, and I really loved my theater classes. And so that was my circuitous route. Eventually, I had an advisor who was also one of my directors who directed me in Equus, and I was playing Martin Dysart, the psychologist in Equus, which is still a role that I'd love to come back to and play again. But my director, Ray Lee, who was a guy I really, really looked up to, and he said, hey, so I'm looking at your transcripts, and you're a really crappy student. and I was like, yeah. And he's like, but you're not stupid. And he's like, except for in your approach to school, I suppose. He's like, but why don't you go out and get some work? And I said, well, I don't know how to do that. And I said, no, I've paid for my next semester. And he said, well, go get your money back, and go out and go to auditions. And he said, I'm going to tell you where some auditions are. So I went to the Southeastern Theatrical Conference auditions, and I auditioned for a bunch of different theater companies, which is it's sort of like up to SCTC. And saw a lot of different companies. Got a call back for Burt Reynolds Theater down in Jupiter, Florida. Really wanted that gig, but it kind of fell through. Got a job at Lost Colony Outdoor Drama, which I worked at. I've got a shirt on right now, Lost Colony.
Yeah.
Worked there for about 6 years. That's where I met my wife. But that was great. I mean, it's the story of the first English colonization in North America, and it's the longest running show in America. It's been running since 1937, and a lot of people got their start there, and so it tells this historical story. But at the end of the night after the shows, we all did plays for one another, and they were really well produced plays. And I probably learned as much there as I learned any place else. We did all kinds of plays. We did Sam Shepard plays. I did several Eric Bogosian plays. I was really very big on Eric Bogosian. Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, Drinking in America, Pounding Nails into the Floor of My Forehead. I loved all those plays because you got to play all these different characters. And that was a blast. And met my wife, Melissa, there. And those are only summer gigs, though. When I say I worked there for 6 years, only in the summertime. And during the regular year, I would get jobs with different touring companies. And I worked with a lot of different touring companies and toured all over pretty extensively on this side of the Mississippi River, but I played all the states on this side of the Mississippi River. I'm doing lots of touring dinner theater and children's theater and things like that. And so I got to see a lot of the country, and I got to play a lot of interesting stuff, and that was fun. Went to New York and did some off-Broadway stuff, and that was interesting. Although I was working so hard to pay the rent that I didn't really get to see very much New York, and did some plays that they were off-Broadway, but they weren't very good. But I did them,
And this is still during the off season. You did this.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so I was getting a lot of experience out on the road. Some experience in New York. I was experiencing what it was like to not have much money and trying to get a gig in New York. But spent a lot of time down in Times Square walking around, handing out flyers, trying to get people to come see our not very good plays. And that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that was pretty much my background. And then I met Melissa. She was working for one touring company. I was working for another touring company. We started talking about starting this company, Gamut, even before we started talking about getting married. We started talking about the ideas of what we would want a company to be, what kind of structure we would want it to have, what kind of plays we would want to do. And we didn't know we were going to do it. We were still out on the road and married in a couple of different companies. We weren't seeing each other very often, like once every couple months or so. But then we came up here to visit her parents over Thanksgiving. This was in 1991, maybe, I think. And I went to the house that we currently live in, which was her parents' house. And we came through Harrisburg, and we're like, well, what's going on here? And we asked around, and there were some things going on. Open Stage had been going for a little bit at that time. Theater Harrisburg it's not Theater Harrisburg yet, it was Harrisburg Community Theater. There was, of course, Oyster Mill and Little Theater Mechanicsburg. But there looked to me like for a capital city that there was an opening, that there was a place. And not just an opening in a real estate sense, but an opening in a sense of, well, what kind of theaters with what kind of missions are around here? And I saw some plays at Open Stage, and I thought they were great. I saw their second production of And a Nightingale Sang. They had done their first production when they very first began. Then their second production was in the space that they currently are in. And I saw that. That was the very first show they did in that space. And I thought that was great. And I thought that in a lot of ways that they had a lot of contemporary plays kind of covered. I was not interested in coming to town and playing, McDonald's versus Burger King. Like if I sell more hamburgers than you do, then I'm winning. And if I run you out of business, then I've won. That whole idea, I think, is very damaging to an area, and it's also damaging to your soul.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like I always tell people, and Alsadek laughs when I tell this story, but I always tell people, if someone says they're an Open Stage person, I always tell them I am too, because I love what they do and I honor what they do. And I was just over at Oyster Mill Playhouse and saw All My Sons, which is a play that's near and dear to my heart. That was the first play I ever got paid for. And so I really wanted to get over and see it, and I thought they did an amazing job of that. And I think it's a very rich area. And so it was nice to settle down here, start things off, and figure out where we fit, because that's what I want. Is I want the whole area to grow as like this wonderful organic puzzle where all the different pieces kind of fit together and complement one another to make a really beautiful picture. And I see that happening. I've seen it happen for a long time, and there's so many different things that are going on right now. Caitlin Gracie Tran's group doing the wonderful musicals that they're doing, and
Doing Bare Bones.
yeah, Bare Bones, and then of course all the improv troops around town. Harrisburg's really getting quite exciting, and it's a real honor to be part of it.
Okay, so to take us back, you said you're around 90, 91. Mm-hmm. You see that at open stage, and you start to say, okay, this is where I can fit. Mm-hmm. Now, you're a classic theater. Mm-hmm. For our listeners, what does that mean, and then what does that mean as far as being a part of the puzzle?
Mm-hmm. Well, I find it to be a suitably defining but also refreshingly malleable term, in that I tell people we try to do the things and keep alive the things that people don't want to forget. So when I say a classic, it can be a 400-year-old play by Shakespeare. It can be a Greek play. It can also be stories that relate to these classic ideas. Like we just did Red Velvet. I thought that was a wonderful story about about an African American Shakespearean actor in the 1830s. I thought, well, yeah, that's kind of up our alley. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then I've gone pretty far afield and got right at the edge of what I think might be classic. But I love comedy, and I love where it comes from. And so we did Bunny Bunny a few years ago, which is about Gilda Radner, and
American classic.
yeah, I think so. And for me, a very important person, and for my daughter, something that was long before she was ever born. This woman passed away, and I thought, well, this is I think a cornerstone in how we see comedy currently.
Yeah.
So there's those things, but also what I like to do is to not just go, well, I really want to do this newest play. I want to see, does it in some way tie into what we say our mission is, which is to keep those things alive that we don't want to forget.
Yeah.
So that's where the classic story is. And people go, well, don't you want to do more new stuff? Well, we do a lot of original plays. I mean, we did William Missouri Downs Women Playing Hamlet last year, which I thought was very funny, and I thought all the female actors in that did a terrific job, and was very glad to see my wife Melissa on stage, because she doesn't get to go on stage very much, and I thought she did a wonderful job in that. But we do some modern plays, but also, I mean, I got a whole lifetime's worth of work, plus then some, of quality stories that have been told before we came along. We really haven't even delved very far into Greek plays. We've done Iphigenia at Aulus, and we've done Lysistrata, and that's it for all the Greek plays. We've not done any Moliere yet. We've not done any Pirandello yet. We haven't. There's a ton of them. So and we get to do classics that people have never heard of, but I think are very important and of interest. Like next year, we're going to do Karl Kapek's R.U.R.
Okay. Now this is one I've heard you've wanted to do for a while.
A long time, yeah. It's actually where we get the word robot. We wouldn't use the word robot if it weren't for this play. Kapek wrote this play, and it was produced in the 1920s. It's really an allegory for losing your humanity to larger machinations of social organization, but it's also about an over-reliance on technology and losing your humanity because you are overly relying upon and giving up your humanity to your technology. robot. The RUR stands for Rossum's Universal Robots, and it's a guy who's selling these robots, which in Czechoslovakian robot just means worker. So that's what these are. They're electrical workers, and it's about people coming to rely on their robots, and then the robots ultimately being the things that have any humanity left in the end.
Well, those are both timely.
Yeah, very timely.
So obviously, with theater, you use these classic plays to explore what we're dealing with now.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool.
Yeah, well, I think any classic speaks across time. I mean, I don't want to do anything just because, hey, look, this is really old. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of really old things that like, okay, is it telling me something that's of value and worth to us now?
Okay.
So that's what I find in that.
So you make the decision and say, okay, we're going to start and we're going to do classics.
Yeah.
And that's your nice. You have your nice parameters for it.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you step from there?
Where do I step from there?
I mean, as far as the progression of the company, like you.
Oh yeah, well, pretty much it was me and Melissa to start out, and we were doing a lot of, a big part of what we do is the Popcorn Hat Players children's shows, and I love them. They were written by either Melissa or me, or our good friend Don Bridge, who we worked for a long time down in North Carolina at a place called the Little Big Theater in Durham, North Carolina. And I think those stories are great. And now, as years went by, some other of our company wrote some scripts too, but the bulk of our scripts are written by the three of us. And in those early days, we were doing a different show every month. Every 4 weeks, new show, and they hadn't all been written, so we were just writing them as fast as we could write them, and getting up and doing them. And I love it because what it means is that we're actively involved in audience members' lives, really demographically across their lifespan. Do you know what I mean?
Very much so.
We have stuff that's specifically for every one of those age groups, and that's great because every one of them have different stories they need to listen to or reflect on or give their own take on or whatever. So that's really important to me, and so that was the next step, was to get those together, and then we started. We would have some local people. They weren't even really actors at the beginning. They were just people who were game to be in our shows. We was just like, we had day jobs, and Melissa was waiting tables at Denny's Lenny's restaurant up in Halifax, and I was working on Denny's French fry trucks. And we'd find somebody who we thought was an interesting person, and we'd ask them if they'd want to be in like Snow White or something like that, and they would. It was really weird because, like I said before this, I'd been on the road for a long time. When we decided to get off the road and settle down, that all really stopped. I mean, it stopped, and it was. I mean, it's easy to look back now and go, oh, it was all a progression. But when it was the middle of the time, I mean, Melissa and I went through some heavy conversations, and a lot of gnashing of teeth and tears as to whether or not we'd not made a horrible mistake. Because, I was like, man, I was working, I was building a good resume, I worked all over, worked for some really wonderful people. I was ready to make the move to Chicago. I had a bunch of friends out there, and, a lot of things were going on. Chicago's a great theater town. And that was where I was ready to go. And the next thing I know, I'm working on a French fry truck for 2.5 years, and and I was like, what kind of mistake have I? Don't get me wrong. And if Denny Williams hears this, you saved my life with that French fry truck job. But the thing was that I didn't know if that was what I was going to just end up doing.
Yeah.
But things started slowly ticking along. Strawberry Square took a chance on us. They said, we made a deal with them about, how we could do our plays there, and we didn't have any money to lay down, so they basically worked out a very, very, very early agreement with us that if we gave them a portion of our ticket sales, we could occupy an empty store of theirs. And that's how that first started, you know. It was like, okay. And I think we gave them 20 cents on the dollar. So, you know, if we got 10 people in, then, you know, they got what, like $2?
Yeah.
So that's what happened in those early days. And later on, of course, it turned into a lease, and we built the theaters. It wasn't always like that, but that took a couple years. And Strawberry Square actually went along with us like that for a while, and then eventually they came in and said, "Hey, it looks like you're actually doing what looks like business." And we were like, "Yes, we are." And they said, "Well, let's sit down and talk about a lease, and and things like that." And we were like, "Wow, how grown up!" And so we started doing it because I started this company. Melissa and I started this company. I was 28 years old. I was 28, she was 26. And so we just, as we went along, we got a little bigger and a little bigger. A big step was the Harrisburg Parks Partnership had revamped Reservoir Park. That's when the playground was put in up there.
Yeah.
And a lot of things were made to look a lot nicer because the bandshell had been falling completely apart. I mean, it was just... kids used to play up in the ribs of the bandshell because all the bases had fallen off the bandshell, so they used to climb all up in the ribs of the thing and everything. But they'd put a lot of money into refurbishing the park, and so they called up several arts groups to ask what they could do on that stage, and largely nobody really took them up on it. The dancers, they said it's great, but this concrete's going to give us all shin splints and stuff like that. And so we said, well, we have an idea for a 7-person Midsummer Night's Dream that we could do. And so they said, great, do that. We don't have any money for you, but you can do it. And so we did, and we had to be very creative with that. So they had just built the playground, and there were mounds and mounds of dirt outside the playground. So I went over and I asked the guys that were working for the city, I said, can I have some of that dirt? And they said, how much do you want? And I said, well, as much as you can give me if you can bring that backhoe over here. And so they did. So they got 22 backhoe loads full of dirt from the playground, dumped it on the stage. I think that it's about a ton per backhoe load, so about 22 tons of dirt. And they dumped them up, and they drove into the pit in front of the bandshell, and they dumped them up on the stage. And then all of us that were doing the show, we got shovels and wheelbarrows, and we built these giant hills up in there, and we went in the woods and pulled up bushes, and we pretty much made it. And I said, well, we'll set it in a junkyard. It's being taken back over by nature. Junk is free, so I went down to the city. I said, can we use one of your dump trucks? And they said, sure. So we just went out on trash dump day. We drove around town, and we found found a zebra-skinned sofa that we put in there, and it was all kinds of stuff, And we made that set. We scraped together, I think, $400 to do that show, and we spent that money we made a giant curtain that covered the whole inside of the bandshell.
Okay.
So that when you come out there, you didn't see our junkyard or anything. You just saw this giant curtain covering the bandshell. And then when the lovers leave Athens, we had the replacement song, Anywhere is Better Than Here, come on, which is a straight driving bass beat, but it starts with a scream, and we always say that's the beginning of Gamut and Shakespeare is Paul Westerberg's scream at the beginning of Anywhere is Better Than Here, and then you see the curtain rise, and back behind there are goth fairies and our deadhead fairies and all that kind of stuff running around in the junk that we'd made, and yeah, we did that whole thing for $400, and that $400 was the curtain. But that was the first Free Shakespeare in the Park show. When it was all over, we had to get rid of the dirt, so we had the dump truck come back out, and we shoveled back into the dump truck, and it took the dirt away, except there was still a bunch of crap left. And I called Michael Hartman, who was working for the city, and I said, I got all this dirt. It's going to take forever to get out. And he said, I'll be up in a minute. And he came up with a fire pumper and pulled up behind the bandshell, and they hooked up the fire hose, and they gave me the fire hose, and I stood in the back door of the bandshell and turned that thing on and just blasted out all the dirt. It was awesome. It was really cool. It was fun, and I was like 29, and the city was, they didn't have any money to give me or anything like that, and I didn't really expect it, but we'd done a show, and Still one of our biggest audiences ever. One night we had nearly 1,000 people out there.
Wow.
At one night, and the city liked us, you know. And it wasn't just like, what are these weird people doing? They were like, oh, they're doing theater.
Yeah.
And that was an amazing feeling, That was an amazing feeling. And I would, it turned out to be my life's work. I didn't realize that that's what it was going to be, but it turned out to be that.
So you're doing Popcorn Hat. you're doing the Shakespeare in the Park.
Mm-hmm.
When do you start bringing in core company members?
Well, in the earliest permutations, I would say probably within the first 2 years or so. One of the first ones was a guy named Eric Messner. He's an actor down in Washington now. Does a lot of things on stage. He's a terrific actor, and he works for DC and Marvel Comics, doing these things called Movies in the Mind. He's where they do these like book length CDs of superhero stories, and he's Green Lantern, but he's also Rocket Raccoon, and he's a couple other things, But that's his gig now. Plus doing a lot of stage work, and just a great guy. But Eric was a local guy and a hack student, and when he was about 19 or 20, he came over and he really wanted to be involved with us, and so he worked with us from the very early days, and he worked for us for a while, and eventually I kicked him out of the nest, which I'm prone to do. Doesn't mean I don't like you. It just means that I think that you need to grow past me. And so Eric could have stayed along with us for a long time, but I was like, hey man, you're very talented, and and I like what you do, and I don't want you to get stuck in a rut. So you've worked for me for about 3 or 4 years. You need to go work for somebody else, And he went down to Baltimore. He made a name in Baltimore and Washington, and now he tours all around, and had a great tour over to Ireland and around places like that. So he was one of the first, along with Laura Sweeney, who still comes back and works with us occasionally. And we started off with 2, For years it was 2, and then we moved to 3, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was getting older. Do you know what I mean? So I was, by the time I was, 40, 41, I'm like, hey, I'm the handsome young prince. Not really anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And other people needed to help do it. Plus, the kids show, there's just so many of them, and they're so high energy. And not that I can't still do them. I mean, I've done them so many times. If you asked me to do them right now, I could do them. But wear you down.
Yeah.
So I get young folks who got a little more energy than me and looking to build a resume, and and if they work for me, they build a resume pretty quick.
Yeah. So you went from you say you started with the 2 and then you go to 3. Now you're currently working at 4 core company members.
4 and 2 interns.
4 and 2 interns. Okay. So now to step back through this time between the first Shakespeare in the Park show and now where you're saying you're in your 40s and you're too old to play the handsome prince, what are some roles and shows in there that, if there's any that you'd like to speak about? Because now I mentioned to you earlier, I'm a Harrisburg native,
right?
And I went to the Harrisburg School District, so I grew up going to the riverfront and seeing popcorn hat shows and going to Shakespeare in the Park. Like if you go to my mother's house, we have all of like the posters and stuff. Like when I met Alexis Dow Campbell, it was very much kind of like I'm meeting someone who I've seen on stage many a time. So there's that level of it. But the picture that's fairly famous, it was up for a long time at Strawberry Square of you with the gun and the dagger and Hamlet.
That's to be or not to be. My Hamlet mullet Hamlet.
Was that in that time period?
Yeah, that was around 97, 98 probably. I guess I was about 34, 35 at that point. My friend Lynn Porter, who had been one of Melissa's professors at Susquehanna University, that's where Melissa went to college. I'd known Lynn for a long time, and she'd become my associate artistic director. She worked with me and came in for a while and sort of lived. She never gave up her jobs teaching at different universities. She eventually landed at Fairfield University in Fairfield, Connecticut, and is still there and holds a high position in that department. But Lynn wanted to direct Hamlet, and she asked me if I'd be in it, and I said, "Yeah, man, absolutely. You couldn't keep me away from it." And so she cast that show. I'm trying to think. I met so many people right around that time. I think that was the first time I worked with Jim Lewis, who's an amazing local actor. Brian Schreffler, who played Claudius, just terrific, and Nancy Krevsky, who's a Harrisburg legend, and she played my mother. Just so many great people in that show, and Dan Burke. I think that might have been the first time Dan and I worked together. I'm not sure. Sorry, Dan. No, the first time we worked together was in Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, that's right. Tybalt and Mercutio. But it was near the beginning. We played Hamlet and Laertes, and that was great. We did it in the Waterworks building that's right off of the Harvey Taylor Bridge there.
Yeah.
Looks like a castle. It was our castle, and we had a great time in there. It was the AC didn't work that well, so it was kind of hot for Denmark, but yeah, we had a wonderful time in that. At that time, I wasn't really directing the dramas so much. I was doing a lot of the comedies. I was much more the funny guy. But I loved the dramas, and started looking at them. And eventually, when we moved into the space on the third floor of Strawberry Square, because we floated around for a long time, we opened up with the Scottish play, which I'm not superstitious. I can say Macbeth. I just don't generally say it around actors because that's bad manners. But we opened up with that one, and I thought that was a terrific show. Always very proud of our Taming of the Shrew, which we did in black and white. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of that.
I have.
Yeah, and they look like black and white pictures, but they're really full color pictures. But we took all the color out of the stage, so everybody had to paint their face, and all the costumes we had to meticulously go through to get all the color out of that to make it look like it was black and white. And that was for a reason. That came out of a long conversation with Lynn, where I was saying, look, doing Shrew is in a lot of ways a really loaded play because issues of misogyny and things like that.
The final speech.
Oh yeah, and how do you handle the hand beneath the foot and that whole deal? And I said, but I think that although those are all very legitimate concerns, I think you lose the intent of the play. Yeah, I mean, I think that the final speech was even over the top for Shakespeare's time. I do.
Yeah.
So I think there's something going on there, but first and foremost, it's a comedy. And I think it needs to be sort of an old comedy. Mm-hmm. So we go, well, this is, we're looking back at a different time. Well, for our place at the end of the 20th century, if you're looking back at an old comedy for the common man, you're probably looking back at the 50s or the 60s, and you're looking at I Love Lucy and stuff like that.
Honeymooners.
Yeah, you watch the Honeymooners, and if you see Ralph Cramden go, to the moon, Alice, bang, zoom, you don't think, that man is beating that woman every night. That poor woman.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just Ralph saying bang zoom. And this is not in any way saying that it's okay to go to a woman and go, I'm going to hit you. But that was Ralph, and it was a different time.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. So I'm like, okay, so let's shoot Shrew through that lens. So let's have a look at that. And I had been watching a documentary about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz and how they had built Desilu and that kind of stuff, and what a powerful couple they were. That they were volatile, that they didn't get along very well, but when they could, they made an amazing, amazing production company. And I thought about Petruchio's line, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but he's like, if she and I be pleased, what's that to you? Which I thought was very interesting. It was like, look, you can come up with all your rules, but you know what? If she's satisfied with our life, and I'm satisfied with our life, then what business is that of yours? How we live our life, and I do think that once Petruchio and Kate figure out how to live together, they are probably the most bonded, solid couple in all of Shakespeare. I think they really are, and I personally think that to unlock that show, you got to figure out what happens on the road. They're towards the end of the play, they're going back to Kate's house, and they're on the road, and Petruchio says, look how the moon shines so bright, and Kate says, I say it is the sun, and he says, I know it is the moon. And then Petruchio says, look what I do or say or think to do, you are still crossing it. Crossed, crossed, and ever crossed, which sounds like he's having a tantrum to me, which is what Kate has been doing. And then I think she sees him having this tantrum, and it's because he's tried to establish a thing where they can live together under the same roof. He does care about her, and he does love her. But he says earlier, I will watch her as we watch these kites that bait and beat and will not be obedient, which means that he's going to try to train her like an animal. She's not one, and she won't be trained like that. And if she can't, they're not going to live peaceably together. So then when we get on the road and she won't acquiesce to what he's saying, he has a breakdown and he has a temper tantrum. And I think she sees him having this tantrum and realizes that that's what she's been doing too. And they both have been doing it, and they're both acting really, really, really silly and doing ridiculous things because ultimately they want to live under the same roof and be a partnership, but they don't know how. And so I think that largely what Shrew's about is that. Now, when you get to the hand beneath the foot, one of the things that I think is happening there is there's lines that happen before that where Kate goes out of the room with the widow. They go to the next room. But you don't know that she's left. She can go upstage and still be in the doorway. What she will hear if she doesn't go completely out of earshot is, now, Petruchio, I think thou hast the veriest shrew of all. And you hear Petruchio being made fun of by all the men in that room. Of you got the worst apple of the barrel, buddy, and everybody laughing about that. Then Kate comes back in, and then she says she'll. Petruchio says, "What will you do for me?" She says, "What would it please my lord?" And then she kneels down there, and I think she gives this to him almost as a gift. Not that she's going to be like this, but in front of all these guys.
Yeah, making a show of it for him.
Yeah, look at this. And then she goes to put her hand down, and what I had was having him take her hand, and he goes down with her. And they go both to the floor, and they are basically kneeling with one another, holding hands together, and realizing that they're a bond. And then they walk away from all these people.
Yeah.
Because they don't need all these people, or their approval or disapproval. Forget those people. You know what I mean? And I thought, to me, that ended up like a good classic TV show. I Love Lucy, whatever, you know.
Yeah. You can almost imagine the iris coming down on the hands.
Yeah, and that sort of thing. Instead of going, well, it's about a guy who, just basically abuses this woman until she learns her place, which is a very offensive story and not one I would ever be interested in telling.
Yeah, it'd be intriguing to think if that's why people would be performing it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not super familiar with that show, but I came to it through Kiss Me Kate, the Cole Porter, and I remember being on stage and she starts to sing, I am ashamed that women are so simple to opt for war when they should kneel in peace. And I'm like, what is going on here? Who wrote that?
Yeah.
And then, obviously, my context, I'm thinking, well, Cole Porter, that's crazy. And then to go back and have discussions with different people who've done the show and be like, no, that's Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Just go. Yeah. But I like the way you interpreted it. Now, if you don't mind my prying, because you were able to make that context of where you were then, and then you said the lens would be that. Mm-hmm. Jumping forward, little over a decade into where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to consider retackling that show,
Mm-hmm.
what would be the context you might consider now for what you say has a strong relationship but is an admittedly problematic show? Would it be that, I mean, obviously you don't want to repeat yourself and you don't want to just fall down the same rabbit hole or anything like that. Do you have an idea where you'd go, oh, well, what's the contextualization? Or do you have any other concepts that you think, like, and even for any show in general, I find that such an interesting thing because people always say you can do Shakespeare anywhere, you can do it in space, you can do it here, you can do it there. You did a very science fiction influenced Troilus and Cressida, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, Troilus and Cressida was basically Middle East like now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Measure for Measure was, I think,
Measure for Measure
was in the future somewhat dystopian.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look at it and go through it again. My general process on these things is I read the play, and I think about it, and I drive around and I go out for walks on the mountain, and I hope that the universe will tell me something. And generally it does. I mean, I find if you keep yourself open, if you know what the thing is at hand, but you don't try to force it into a hole. Like people will say, oh wow, you took True and you pigeonholed it into a 50s black and white sitcom. But that's not exactly how I came to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I knew what the story was, and then I waited for the universe to tell me things, and that's going to sound very mystical, but I don't think that it is. It's just really there's all kinds of things around you all day long that are telling you things that are good, bad, whatever, and you can choose to hear them. What ultimately came through with me was I was sitting there in the Discovery Channel, happened to be showing a thing about Lucy and Desi.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I tend to listen to stories and scenarios and think about what other stories and scenarios they remind me of. Like we were talking about Seagull the other night because we're doing Seagull, and I said it reminds me of another story. I don't know what it is, but it reminds me of something, and it just bugging the hell out of me for about a day. And then it just came to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, it reminds me of All About Eve. The relationship between Nina and Arkadina, this young actress who really wants to be a famous actress, and this older actress she's not flawless by any means, but she is accomplished, and you have this young girl who's kind of a climber,
Yeah.
and then she gets to this point, and is she happy being at that point? Is Eve happy at the end of All About Eve? She's kind of jaded. Nina's not jaded. She's crazy. I'm sorry to be a spoiler, but but it did remind me of that story.
Yeah.
And I if there's one thing that I guess that I have, it's an ability to think in terms of abstracting things towards storylines. Like I do that all the time. Like if I'm dealing with an issue with another person or something like that, I'll say, well, "What am I in? What am I in? Oh, I'm in a King John right now. I understand what's going on." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm in a King John. I want the whole kingdom to love me, and that's why they don't, because I'm trying so hard to make them do that. Yeah. I'm in a King John. Or
So you have to find that reference point story wise.
I do that, and I do that with the kid shows. I'm constantly like, I'm in a little red hen. I need to get out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if there's any strength that I think I have, it is that I remember a lot of storylines, and they're sort of resonant in me for what's happening in my life.
Okay. So you have an interest in, you said RUR is coming up, and then I know you did The Dresser. I'd heard that's one you'd wanted to do for a while.
Oh, I love that play, yeah.
We had discussed Red Velvet. Mm-hmm. What are some other shows you're interested in? And this is just me at this point. I'm intrigued. It's
there's quite a few on my bucket list. In the classic sense, I've always wanted to do Luigi Pirandello's 6 Characters in Search of an Author. I think it's a really fascinating look at what is a human being and what is a character of a human being and where do those lines cross. I think that's fascinating, so I'd love to do that. I'd love to go back and revisit Edward Albee's The Zoo Story. I did that many years ago, and that was terrific. but there's some weird ones that I'll probably never do, but I'd love to do. There's one called by Larry Larson and Levi Lee called "Some Things You Need to Know Before the World Ends," subtitled "A Final Evening with the Illuminati." Very interesting, bizarre, kind of a Salvador Dali show.
Okay.
In a way, which takes place in this monastery made out of old car parts, and these two monks, just on the night the world is about to end, in a sort of a head nod to Ingmar Bergman's Seventh Seal. One of them plays a game of horse basketball with death. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's called Some Things You Need to Know Before the World Ends. I really want to do a play by Edward Bond called Bingo. We probably will do that one eventually. It is an amazing play with a really terrible title because I don't know why writers do this. I'll call it this. And you're like, there's no reference to that anywhere in your play. It's called Bingo, but it's about Shakespeare in retirement. This is when he's left London, gone back to Stratford. He's still writing, and he's sending down plays like The Winter's Tale and Tempest and things like that. But he's in retirement, and he is not very happy. He never really, was. He didn't go back to Stratford very much, for good reason. He didn't really fit into Stratford. And so in this play, he sort of ambles around town with his 13-year-old daughter, Judith, who's sort of his one point of deep human contact. He can talk to her, not really much of anybody else. His wife, Anne Hathaway, is never seen. She's just a crying voice behind a door who's convinced that they're going to hell because they've made their money by doing the devil's business, And it's a very, very interesting story, and there's a wonderful scene with Ben Jonson, who's been sent up to Stratford to try to convince Shakespeare to come back down. And Ben Jonson, as Ben Jonson was wont to do, gets progressively more and more drunk and belligerent and going, because they told me to get you back because they love you, you ass. It's a wonderful scene. But it's a very affecting show by Edward Bond, and it was. The RSC ran it back in about 1971 or 72. I got to tell you, I love those angry young men of England right in the late 60s and early 70s. Lindsay Anderson and Joe Orton and all those guys, man. John Osborne and Don't Look Back in Anger and all those guys. What eventually would things like movies like If and ultimately Clockwork Orange and stuff like that would come out of those kinds of. So I really love that period. And there's one play that, my God, I would love to do, but I'm afraid that people would just not be happy with me if I did it. But I love the play, and it's called The Ruling Class. It was a stage play written by Peter Barnes. There is a film version, which is word for word the same as the play. It's with Peter O'Toole. It's an amazing story about an English lord who he's supposed to take his seat in the House of Lords because his father has died in an autoerotic hanging, and so he has to take his father's seat in the House of Lords. Peter O'Toole plays a guy named Jack Gurney, but he's in the insane asylum because he thinks he's Jesus, and so they have to get him out and try to get him to take his seat in the House of Lords. But they can't do it as long as he thinks he's Jesus. And, of course, he's got the long hair and the beard and everything, but he wears a white suit and tie and stuff. And they keep trying to convince him that he's not Jesus. And they put him through all these different crazy cures. And then, I don't want to give you a spoiler, but he does change significantly and becomes very, very unyielding and harsh. And I guess you would say, in the worst terms, conservative. And everybody comes to love him, but they don't know who he's actually become.
Okay, so that's so that's hopefully this is the preview for the upcoming eventually The Ruling Class. Yeah,
I would love to do The Ruling Class, man. I don't know. I'd have to make sure I didn't lose my job.
No.
my board still can fire me, you know.
Well, now here's a question. You guys have moved recently.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it'd be safer or less safe with your new space?
Well, I think it'd be, you know, I mean, the fact that it used to be a church, I think sort of resonates with some people. Although we're coming to, you know, just say, look, we honor the history that was here in this place, and in no way deny it. It was a great building for what it became, but it's no longer consecrated as a church. The church turned it over to us. We talked to the some members of the congregation and stuff like that, and they were happy that it was being used. And then we sort of rededicated it to our purposes with different things that were important to us. We had a little ceremony that was, you know, was important to us, and we, you know, rededicated that building, and not in any way denying what came before, but it's serving another purpose now. But yeah, to a lot of people, yeah, you know, it's like, that's a church. I think it's going to take a little while, and eventually I'm going to try to sell the steeple because I think some people are interested in it, and I think that'll help.
Yeah.
But for that reason, I think doing that play in that building might be a little bit of trouble, at least for the next year or two.
Understood.
You know, because the man sleeps on a cross in the
well.
play.
Yeah, let's at least wait for the steeple to go away just for a little bit.
Yeah. If you get a chance to see it, man, you dig that movie.
Yeah, I'll check it out for sure. I mean, hey,
Yeah.
In the world we live in now, everything's a click away.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Criterion actually has it, and it's wonderful because they do a long interview with Peter O'Toole through the whole thing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it's right. And O'Toole, as far as movies go, O'Toole's my guy, man. I was always like, if I could, you know, people ask me, would you like to do movies? And I'm like, no, unless I could have Daniel Day-Lewis's career or Peter O'Toole's career. So, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, I love my friends and bless them, and a lot of them went out to, you know, California, and they're doing it, and that's good. For me, if I said, well, you know, I was in the background on Big Bang Theory, and then I got 2 lines on the, you know, and that's my year.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's going to make me, and nothing against it.
No, just not your thing.
It's not my thing. I'd rather say, you know, I made significantly less money, but was in an area and did the roles that I wanted to do, and you know, and enjoyed myself and was very creatively fulfilled. I'm very happy doing what I'm doing.
Nice. Did you hear they're actually releasing Strangelove on Criterion?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool, man.
That's the upcoming crop.
Yeah.
Which I find it insane that it's not already on there. But
Yeah. Well, do you do Hulu? Do you have Hulu?
I don't have Hulu. We do Netflix.
Yeah.
And then usually people loan me stuff, or at the end of a season.
If you do Hulu Plus, there's a Criterion channel. They've got like over 800 Criterion titles in there.
Well, okay, now I gotta go find Hulu and disappear. This will be the last episode of the show for a nice little chunk of time while Clark sends me down the Hulu Criterion rabbit hole.
Yeah.
That was actually something I was doing in high school as a nerd. You know Alex Kashock?
Yeah.
I was doing the Full Monty, and I gave him, I think I loaned him The Life Aquatic, and he came back and was like, hey, check out Seven Samurai and City of God.
Right.
And I saw both of those like in the same weekend.
Right.
And it was just like, so I went out and I bought a Criterion, and then they have the little fold out.
Yeah.
And for a while I was going through and I was just trying to see them all or like buy them. And I'd buy them and then I'd watch them and then I'd return them to FYE and or exchange it for a new one. And I was just burning through all these old Criterion movies. But that's super cool about that Hulu Plus.
Hulu Plus, yeah, you do Hulu Plus. It's cheaper than Netflix. I mean, we do Netflix and Hulu Plus, and yeah.
Well, I mean, the pop culture nerd in me. I mean, Daredevil's coming out Friday. And
Yeah.
So you run into that, and I'm just like, hey, I'm gonna check out what I would check out in that sense. Cool. But you know.
So is that the history? You want to know anything else?
Ah, geez, man, I really do. I guess I'll ask you as we start to wrap up here, because I don't want to take your entire evening. I know you work a full day, and
No, that's fine.
So you had mentioned Taming the Shrew. You had mentioned Hamlet.
Mm-hmm.
I saw you in To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was a great performance. If you could say, like, right now, just with the understanding that we'll talk again and you might be like, ah, forgot this one. Say like top 3 roles that you
Did I play?
Yeah, and then maybe after that, one dream role.
Okay. In my life,
Not Hansel, right?
not Hansel. Dysart and Equus. Um, it's yeah, I loved Atticus. He was great. It was a lot of fun. I got to revisit my grandfather, and that was wonderful. And Sir, I like playing Sir in the dressing room. I mean, there's a lot of others in there. I was so quiet because there was like, well, if I say that one, it's going to knock that one out, and
Yeah, well, like I said,
yeah.
you're always welcome to come back
Yeah.
and expand the list and just say, hey, these are just in no particular order. Here's 10.
Cool. And a dream role?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I've gotten to play so many that I wanted. I'm very fortunate, and I've gotten to play people that I really wanted to. I'd love to. I'd love to play Jack Gurney in the ruling class, but I'm a little too old for that. the Peter O'Toole role. But I don't know. Maybe like Ben Johnson or in Bingo. I really want to do that play.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Okay.
But yeah, I've been very fortunate. I'd like to play Hoss in The Tooth of Crime, in Sam Shepard's The Tooth of Crime. I'd really like to play that. I would so love to do that play. It's an amazing play.
Nice.
Do you know The Tooth of Crime?
I do not.
Sort of like this weird dreamscape, pseudo Old West, but with rock and roll and leather and all this kind of stuff, and it's a showdown between like this younger rock star kind of gunslinger kind of guy and an older rock star gunslinger kind of guy.
Yeah.
It's really very hallucinatory. It is an amazing story. I'd love to do Tooth of Crime.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me, Clark. This has been
pleasure.
awesome.
Yeah, cool, man.
Okay.